It's Monday morning at 8:29. I don't know if I've ever recorded a podcast in the morning, but as I looked at my day and realized I had 8,000 things to do, and the best way to organize my day to get them all done, it made sense for me to grab this little moment of quiet and do my next episode. So as I begin 234, I love those sequential number episodes, episode 234, I have a bit of a knot in my tummy, and I just think it comes from where my life is at right now. I think sometimes we wake up and we feel comfortable and fine, and then sometimes we wake up and feel anxious, and that's where I'm at right now. So I have a lot of reasons. One of them is there's a very public sort of back and forth in our community on should we rename the rebuild of Runlet Middle School or should we leave it named after Louis Duke Runlet? And I wrote an article about that, which of course always generates comments and commentary. And so there was some pretty specific commentary from a woman whose husband was uniquely and directly involved in my forced resignation from the school district and some horrific treatment to me. She made a bit of a snarky comment, and so I responded, not knowing where it was coming from. And she posted a quote from me that was very, very harsh around the actions of her husband and the school superintendent at that time. Reading it was hard because it was mean, but I remember it now. It was in a thread where I was being accused of a bunch of stuff when I lost my coaching job at Bo. I did a whole podcast episode on that several months ago, telling the true story. I changed the names to protect the guilty, but that's a behavior I'm stopping. So I responded very, very firmly and simply said, you're right, that's hurtful and I'm sorry it hurt you, but everything in there is true and provable. So that just has my tummy in a knot because it brings everything back up. I'm doing some physical training and strength building with a friend of mine, and his health is not good, and it also generates a lot of anxiety, worry on my part, just anxiety, I guess. Also, my connection with this person is many things, and sometimes anxiety producing. So there's that. Things at home are tricky, constantly trying to create a schedule that allows me to get everything done while paying good attention to Jack, while trying to honor Kenny's and my mother's needs, etc. I often feel like as long as I'm taking care of everyone else, then I should be happy, which fosters a bit of resentment. So again, I get defensive and anxious. So I started thinking about this, and I swear to God, our phones don't only listen to us, but they read our minds. And I've been getting all these quotes about you get from the universe what you give to the universe, which basically to me says you can never have a bad day, because if you have a bad day, then you're going to get a bad day back. And isn't that just the vicious cycle, right? It never ends. So I started pondering that. Ponder, isn't that a great word? Ponder, to reflect. I started pondering how to work around always putting good into the universe, even when you feel like shit, right? Sometimes I just think it's okay to feel crappy. It's okay to be angry and mad. And it's okay to express those things. I think we live in a world of submission and stifling and hiding if we tell people that they can't express their feelings. And I have a very, very rich history of being told to be quiet. That got me thinking about karma. So karma is another one, karma will get you. If I look at a list of bad things that have happened to me, if I took karma for the very Americanized modern view, which is you get what you give, or if you do something bad, it's going to come back and get done to you, right? Like if I looked at that definition, then being the victim of sexual abuse, being the victim of some pretty abusive romantic relationships, losing my job after trying to help a family, losing a job in Bo at coaching cross country that was also incredibly painful and wrong, losing a child, right? Having serious illnesses and surgeries myself. When I look at the things I've gone through, if I believe karma, then I deserved every single one of these. I did a bad thing to be molested at age 7. I did a bad thing to lose 2 children in my life. I must be a horrible person. Now, in looking at the intended definition of karma, which I looked up, it isn't this way at all. It simply implies that actions cause reactions, so to speak, if you look at the scientific version. So I looked up the definition of karma, and it says the concept of karma has its roots in ancient India and is an integral part of Indian religion and philosophy. The word karma in Sanskrit means action, and it encompasses the idea that one's actions determine the future consequences of one's life. Okay, this absolutely makes sense and does not translate to me that if you do a bad thing, that bad thing will come back. Or if a bad thing happened to you, it must have been because you did a bad thing, right? It simply says every action has an equal or opposite reaction, right? So that our choices and our actions do indicate what might happen to us next. I've never, ever doubted this. I also need to make very clear my firmly held belief that sometimes things happen to you, maybe from decisions you made that were not your fault. Let me give you an example. I'm walking home and I'm late, so I take a shortcut, even though I know the shortcut is through a dark, wooded area and it's gotten dark out. But I've done it a million times, so I think I'll be safe. So I take the shortcut and I get attacked. So karma would say, well, if you hadn't taken the shortcut, you wouldn't have gotten attacked. It's all your fault. Okay, well, I did definitely increase my likelihood of a problem by taking a dark, unlit trail in the woods after, in the evening, for sure. But does that mean I deserved to get attacked? Does that mean I should that what happened to me is my fault? No, that person chose to hide in the woods and attack somebody. So this is my internal struggle with the whole idea of karma. So along with the internet reading my mind all the time, I get these memes. And so I've gotten a couple, and I actually was talking them over with my friend who I'm working out with. He and I share a lot of intellectual, wonderful conversations. And so we got talking about these different things. There were these 6 unknown laws that were on a meme. And so we went through them and talked about what they might mean. So I'm going to go through these 6 laws that we all sort of live by or might not even know we live by. So the first one is called the Great Law. And it says, whatever energy and thoughts you put out into the universe will be returned to you, good or bad. So this is wonderful, and I think in some ways I believe it. If you're walking down the street and you see somebody with a scowl on their face and they're angry and everything, you're not likely to go say hi. If you are, you might listen to some really unhappy and difficult things to hear, which might make you unhappy. Like part of me understands that if you're always happy and smiling, you're going to get happy and smiling back. At least that's what that says in my basic definition. I do believe that the more that you can share love and positive energy in the world, the more that contributes to love and positive energy in the world. I also believe that doesn't mean you should put your thoughts in your shoe. I think it means that you should process your thoughts. So if you wake up and you're having a horrible, horrible, terrible, no good, really bad day, which is one of my favorite children's books, process through that horrible, terrible, no good, really bad day. Look at what's making it that way. Find ways to practice self-forgiveness and self-love, right? In my cranky moments, and I've had a cranky morning. I was angry at Kenny for pushing the snooze button 3 times and then saying when he got downstairs, well, I've been awake for 45 minutes. Well, okay, but lying in bed awake isn't getting up. Just, nudgy. I could definitely swallow all that and just greet Kenny with a big fat smile, and we'd have a lovely morning. But the part of me that wants him to get up and share the morning feels angry. So it all falls on me, right? He's in his clueless little la-la land. I'm the one holding the hot stone, right? So the Great Law, put out what you put into the universe comes back. Okay, I'll try to live by that. The law of creation. Hey, can you tell that I'm putting some snark out there? So by all means, give me some snark back. Send me a snarky response to this episode. And then, God is good. God is glorious. The sun is beautiful. There's some fun ones. The law of creation. Life won't just happen to you. You must take action and create it instead of it magically working out. Boy, sometimes when I think of the greatest things in my life, some of them seem to have happened by circumstance. They just happened. Like, how lucky am I? The word luck, right? Then when I think of some of my greatest achievements, breaking 5 minutes in the mile, landing a job I've really wanted, taking a group of high school girls to a New England title in cross country, publishing a book, starting a podcast. These things are not done happenstance. I didn't just wake up and run a sub 5 minute mile. I worked hard, meticulously hard. Every gain I've had physically in CrossFit has come from day after day after day of working hard. I do believe we have to create our realities. I also know sometimes when I'm just so tired, I don't want to create a reality anymore. I'd like to have a passively created reality off to the side here. I think that's a symptom of the Gen Alpha philosophy of life, find ways for money to come to you without doing anything. Even people that have money that come to them, passive income, they've done a lot to create what creates the passive income. But yeah, the law of creation, the law of humility. I have a story for this one. Be humble enough to accept that your current situation is the result of your past actions. When I was training to break 5 minutes in the mile, Coach Ludi had me practice when I did this, how to run a victory lap. And that the first thing I needed to do was practice humility. And we walked through it. We actually practiced it a couple of times in track practice on the track. Finish the race, celebrate, hug a few people, catch my breath, and then stand up and begin jogging the victory lap and wave and say thank you to people that congratulated me as I jogged the lap. When I think of humility, that's what I think of. I think of Coach Ludi reminding me that along with all my hard work, a lot of me achieving goals is the piece that we told doesn't exist, the happenstance piece. A lot of it was luck. Everything came together for me that day. 90% of the time, 90% of that was because I worked my butt off for it. But 10% of it was things out of my control, getting tripped and falling down in the race, making a tactical error, waking up that day with a chest cold. Like so many things could have made that race on that day at that time not happen, but it did. Coach's biggest concern for me was that I would not appear humble. I'm often accused of being very full of myself. I think in some ways maybe I am. I'll just have to humbly acknowledge that sometimes I'm not so humble. I do know in our culture that women, female-bodied human women, are vilified and criticized for having strong personalities. I remember in my coaching years in Concord High School when I coached with Zach Emerson for a while, I always wanted the boys team to participate with some of the things that we did. And Zach said to me, well, the boys are a bit afraid of you. And I'm like, afraid of me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And he said, well, you're a bit emasculating. And at the time, I was utterly offended. Like, what? What do you mean emasculating? Because I'm strong and loud and I hold people accountable? Now it makes me sad that him as a coach got caught up in the fact that my female strength was allowed to be considered emasculating. Like he supported that rather than let's have a conversation about why that might happen. Because I think I remember asking, can we talk about this? And he thought, no, that wouldn't be helpful. But I look at humility in that lens, that sometimes men aren't considered to be snotty and full of themselves when they act the same way as women. I've often used Matt and Becky Bonner as good examples of this. Matt Bonner is an NBA star, an amazing athlete. His sister Becky, also a very, very full scholarship Division I basketball player, played for Stanford and then Boston University. She is currently the highest ranking female employee in the NBA. She has a front office job. So both of these people are incredibly successful in their work. Knowing them in high school and watching them behave essentially the same way, Becky received a lot of criticism that Matt didn't. I think girls in and of themselves are more internally competitive. Like on Wednesdays, we wear pink. I call it the mean girl mentality. You all have to fit a certain mold to be popular. Popularity among boys isn't always that way. Amazing athletes are heralded and not criticized for talking about how great they are. All the guys wish they were that great. They want to be near the person who's great. They see that as an improvement in their status. Girls see somebody super successful as a threat to their status. And so Becky was often called snotty and full of herself and, a braggart, etc., where Matt wasn't, and they were doing the same thing. It was remarkable to me at the time, and it remains that way. Humility. The law of humility. That's an interesting one. Okay, the law of growth. Focus on controlling yourself, not others. Real change begins within. Personal growth is the priority. This I have to agree with 9,000%, and also to acknowledge that it is incredibly difficult sometimes to keep focusing on the personal growth. And I think perhaps my desire for justice in my job loss that continues a decade and a half later is an example of me trying to change outward things as opposed to just focusing on my personal growth. I do have to say forgiveness, both self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others, should not preclude justice. So what I mean by that is you can have mothers of murdered children forgive their child's murderer, but that doesn't mean the mother wants the murderer not to pay the prison sentence, right? Forgiveness and justice are two different things. And I think that's where I get caught up sometimes, and also where where people often tell me, move along, move along. Why are you still talking about that? I also compare myself this to if I were not female, if I were a man and I were bringing these things up, would it be more acceptable to be listened to, or would I still be silenced like this? When I look at and I'm talking specifically about my job loss in the school district, when I look at the separation agreements that Christine Rath meted out over her time as a superintendent, they were heavy on the female side. Back to the Mean Girls, on Wednesdays we wear pink. She had a very specific idea of what constituted okay. And if you didn't fit it, there was no discussion. So self-growth in regard to all I've gone through would be the work I do with Carolina. It would be trying to maintain physical health, mental health, try to be of service to others, live through the foundation, those sorts of things. I've tried very hard to take the bad things and make them good things. Living in the town where so many of these things have happened can make the separation tricky. I have to commiserate with people that were around when all these things were going down, my job loss and all that sort of thing. And everyone has an opinion. And I've often compared Concord to a middle school cafeteria. So I should probably just wear pink every day and I'd be okay. The law of responsibility. Everything that happened in your life happens because of you. Own it. You are the result of your choices. So this goes back a little bit to the idea of karma, doesn't it? Or to the great law. You made a choice and then these things happen to you. The whole purpose of my podcast, 1,000 Tiny Steps, is to walk backwards until I can try to identify the first step, the first choice that resulted in something happening that was either amazing or terrible. The law of responsibility is kind of the whole point behind the podcast, like what choices of mine caused what. In the first few seasons, I really just did a life story, trying to connect and find out and create and discover what choice led me to break 5 minutes in the mile. What was the first choice? What was the first choice that landed me Division I All-American? What was the first choice that landed me a sexual abuse victim, if there was one? What was the first choice that got me fired from, the Concord School District? Like I would go back and look, and some of them became pretty clear. What was the first choice that indicated or decided that Molly would die on May 2nd, 2016? Like all of those things rushed to my mind. And I think sometimes what we're supposed to do on the earth is to search for answers, but it doesn't mean that we're supposed to find the answers. So that goes back to the journey versus the destination. If your search is to find an answer and you never find the answer, is the search worthless? Well, no, because you probably learned a lot of other things in search of the answer that you can't find. So will I ever know for sure why Molly had to die or what I did to contribute to the death? No. Those are all things I think the universe will share with me when I'm no longer trapped inside the physical realm of being a human, but it doesn't mean I will stop looking. So I like that one, the law of responsibility. I think I'm going to print all these out in fancy fonts and hang them around my office. The last one that is on this little meme on the socials is the law of connection. Your past, present, and future are connected. Past actions shape who you are today, and present choices decide who you become tomorrow. That fits into all of these. It's a nice one to wrap up the little meme, isn't it? Of course we're connected. Of course what I do today is going to affect tomorrow, and what happens today is affected by yesterday. Think of a million ways that this is true. And for someone like me that sort of just refuses to be quiet, I think this happens more obviously and more publicly and more frequently because I'm constantly out loud commiserating and sharing all of the things that happened to me. I look at the little house on Linden Street and starting running. And it was running that introduced me to Coach Ludi. Well, I wouldn't have started running if I hadn't fallen in love with Bruce, my biology teacher. And I wouldn't have fallen in love with Bruce if I hadn't had him for biology. And I wouldn't have had him for biology if I hadn't decided not to go to Bishop Brady. And, on and on and on, right? We can go back and back and back. And I look at having Coach Ludi as my lifetime coach and mentor and father figure and friend. And now I have his home, which I've been able to provide beautiful living space to some really wonderful people. Past, present, future, it's all connected. Sometimes I'm happy about that and sometimes not so much. So anyway, that was my little meme on the laws, the great laws. And they're just interesting to think about. So I had another one, which was these different principles that exist that we may not know about. And it's along the same lines, but different. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. Hamlin's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity or carelessness. Most people aren't out to get you. They're just distracted. Don't take neglect personally. Okay, so this is a really good one for today. I piss and moan all the time about Kenny not getting up to his alarm, that he hits it again, hits it again, hits it again. And my feeling is this is an ongoing issue. Of course, you know what you're doing. So I look at it as an act of malice. And he actually said to me this morning, what do you think? I'm just doing it on purpose to piss you off? And part of me thinks yes, because why would you keep doing it when you know it's not helpful to our morning routine? And actually, that has nothing to do with it. I think that he doesn't remember when he wakes up that he should get up quick, or it takes him a while to wake up, or Jack's still asleep next to him and he wants to look at him for a while. I mean, there's a million reasons, but I do often take it personally. And you're right, I guess I shouldn't. Okay, Hamlin's razor. Wah, wah, wah. Perfect for me to record the podcast episode right now. The Pareto Principle. People rise to their level of incompetence. Great employees often make terrible managers. Success in one role doesn't guarantee skill in the next. So the way that I can evidence this most in myself and my life is runners that I've coached that have become coaches. And let me be clear, I've coached runners of every level, and I have runners of every level who now coach. And some of the folks that are really amazing coaches, I'm surprised at. I didn't think they liked running enough. So I'm going to use a woman named Alice. She's the coach of cross country and track for women at Plymouth State University. So she's a collegiate coach. She hated running. She was a good runner. I mean, I think she came to love running as she got into high school and college. But as a youngster, oh my God, she did everything she could to get out of running. I remember dividing the team up one day and I said, throwers over here. And I turn around and there's skinny little Alice standing with all the throwers. It's actually a really funny memory, but she hated running. And I never saw the side of her that loved it or that would love sharing it with others. So shout out to Alice at Plymouth. Rachel, who ran for me, was this amazing athlete. And she did a couple of recreation things and realized right away, nope, coaching is not for me. There was a lot of organization and chaos that wasn't in her realm. Now, having said this, she is an unbelievable caretaker of some of our most suffering children in a residential home for kids with some emotional issues. So she absolutely knows how to give the love. But standing on the sidelines with a stopwatch, it didn't work for her. Devin Devers is a coach in Vermont, longtime coach, big teams, middle school level, sends them off to high school and college, has been instrumental in her community's running program for kids. Doesn't surprise me at all. She was always looking at how to make it better for others. I see those people who were great runners also turning around now and being great coaches, but it isn't always that way. I have a lot of talent talking and writing. I have a very hard time with self-structure. I think I would be much better off to be a writer for a company who was told every day what I needed to write that day. And then I would write it and hand it in. It's funny. I want to be entrepreneurial. I'm doing this podcast and I'm not talented at what it takes to make it work. I get too distracted. Maybe I just have serious ADHD. Maybe I need to buy another app. Who knows? I liked the Pareto Principle. We rise to our level of incompetence. And we try something and we practice and we get as good as we get. And once we're as good as we get, that's it. Beyond there, we're incompetent. So we won't get better. Interesting. The Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm going to have to do a lot of research on why these things are named this way. Who's Hamlin? Who's Peter? Who are Dunning and Kruger? Anyway, the less you know, the more certain you feel. Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance breeds confidence. Mastery breeds humility. The more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know. This is so utterly true. And I think sometimes for overthinkers like me whose minds can't help but ponder every single possibility, it's easy to get paralyzed with an overwhelm of thought and just stop completely. And I do this sometimes. For reasons that are beyond me, I'll put a TV series on and I'll just lie all day long and watch TV and watch a series and tick, 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 all these things I'm not doing, the time's going by and I'm swallowed up in a TV show. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I'm that way. And it's a huge harbinger for me of where I'm at mentally and emotionally by my desire to wake up and jump right into the day or wake up and watch something on TV. I agree. I think sometimes the more that you know about something, the more you realize you don't know. Let me also use Molly and Gracie as a comparison. And I used to have to be careful about this because I didn't want ever for Gracie to think she wasn't smart, because that wasn't it at all. But in terms of outlook, Gracie took everything at face value and she looked at the world through rose-colored glasses. So she was ignorant to all the possibilities that existed with everything she saw. Whereas Molly questioned and questioned and questioned and why and why and why. That doesn't make sense. And I don't see that could be possible. Always seeing 55 sides of the same thing. My favorite story is the spider squishing story. There was a spider. I picked it up in a paper towel and I put it in the toilet and flushed the toilet. To which Gracie replied, "Oh, that's wonderful. The spider can go and be with his friends in the sewage treatment plant." And she toddled off. Let me be clear. She was probably 4, maybe 5. Like she wasn't a baby. She wasn't huge either. And Molly, who was 2 years younger, so either 2 or 3, looked at me and said, "Gracie knows that spider's dead, right?" There we are. Gracie only saw the possibility that I scooped up the spider and sent it on its merry way. Sort of like Nemo getting flushed out of the dentist's office, right? All drains lead to the ocean. That's a really good example in my mind of this principle, that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and the harder things are to contemplate. Molly had a lot of internal anxiety that Gracie did not have. Now, Gracie is an incredibly anxious person. I think Gracie's nervous tummy comes from being afraid of things in general, just nervous and anxious about what to do next. Molly's nervous tummies were really, really linked to profound thoughts. When I think of 2 nights before she died when she switched her Instagram bio from Mall's balls and all that to, "Do you think you have a purpose? If so, what?" I think mine is to make people happy. Does that make you happy? Yes. Purpose fulfilled. She was 13 when she did that. That's somebody lying in their bed thinking about having a life purpose. Do I have a purpose? What is my purpose? If I do, have I done it? Will I do it? And those weren't always Gracie's thoughts. So Dunning-Kruger effect. Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time you give it. The busy feelings are often poor structure, not hard work. Shorten the deadline. Okay, this is me to an absolute T. When I was a public school teacher, like brick and mortar, the last day of school would come and I would have the summer ahead of me, and I have no full-time job in the summer. And I was, from the crack of dawn till dusk, I was running around doing things, organizing, getting things to, and I can remember thinking to myself, how do I have time to fit in a full day of teaching and still get done the same amount of stuff that I'm getting done now? It was the Parkinson's law. So if I have 15 minutes to get something done, I can pretty much get it done in 15 minutes. If I have all day to get it done, it takes me all day to get it done. I always call this the balloon effect, but it is the story of my life sometimes. And I do think part of it is executive functioning and ADHD. I had months to write my master's thesis proposal, and I waited until it was due in 3 days. And this was what, handwrite and then type and hope you don't make mistakes. So the typing was slow. And I handed it in. It was like 60 pages done in 3 days with not a lot of sleep. Yeah, not good. Parkinson's law. I should get a t-shirt. And then finally, the Pareto Principle. 80-20. This is the 80-20. 80% of your results come from 20% of your work. Identify the 20%. The rest is just noise. Boy, I'd be hard pressed right now to even filter out what work and what I'm doing in my daily life, what goes with what. I don't know. It's chaotic, but these are things that I should sit on a yoga mat on my porch at 2 a.m. and think about. That's what I do. I do know that when I look at this, sometimes I look at this always physically, like CrossFit. So if 20% of my actions provide 80% of the results, what am I 20%? I don't know. It would be hard to filter out 80% of my physical training as being unnecessary. Having said that, focusing on the 20%, I could say I could focus more on mobility and auxiliary work so that I can maintain the effects of the big lifts. Is that some scientific talk right there? I don't know. These are all things, though. All of these laws and all of these principles and such really do contribute to a lot of the ways that we all function. So here's your assignment. They'll all be listed in the show notes. I have a fantastic editor. So choose one. Choose a law or a principle or an effect or whatever. Give me an example in your life of how you evidence it or how you've seen it. The third week of February, it's school vacation week in Massachusetts. Next week is school vacation week in New Hampshire. It's still the middle of winter, but light enough at 5 o'clock now to get all New Englanders thinking of spring. And I've mentioned before, I'm at a bit of a fork in the road podcast-wise. And so although I'm still in the spilling the tea episodes here, I might have 1 or 2 doozies of tea spilling. I'm actually thinking of returning to having some guests on the podcast. I really do love guest episodes. I like finding out about other people, seeing how they got to where they are. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm still round and round and round. I don't think there's a principle on here for me. I should create one. The Barb principle.
So listen, be good to yourself, do a little self-knowledge and self-study and see if you can learn something about yourself. Be good to someone else. And sometimes that might mean hold your tongue, say what you want to say to them to the mirror or out running. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.